Hi, everyone. I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks with us today. We are a year-round digital talk series bringing you the best creative voices across film, television, theater, and entertainment. And today we are joined by the incredible cinematography team behind Nat Geo's Life Below Zero, the wonderful Ben Mullin and Dwayne Fowler with us today. And, Ben, you were just mentioning how you're actually on location right now in Alaska and kind of living the life of luxury in a hotel room, which is rare for you, usually living in camps. But I was just really curious about the way that production's already looking very different for you, because there were several months where you weren't shooting. And so now you're actually out there for what sounds like a longer period of time to make up and really capture more footage to kind of play catch up with the whole production.
Absolutely. So, by the way, thank you for having us. We're thrilled to be here and speaking with you about our jobs. Yes, we have been, like everybody else, basically on hiatus and wondering what was going to happen with the production world for months and months and months. And we finally got the green light from Nat Geo and BBC. And so we had all that time to make up and all that content that didn't get acquired in order to fill the pipeline to get episodes out in a timely fashion and keep the fans with something to look at. So instead of going out for our normal period of time, which is usually about 3 weeks out in the field, and then we'll come home for 3 weeks or so and then reboot and come back up, and we're on this constant revolving sort of 2 to 3, sometimes 4 week schedule of being in the field. And this time we're out for what will end up being probably 2 months. So we, as the show, Life Below Zero, have 5 teams out in the field right now as we speak. And each one of them will accomplish the record longest leg, is what we call an individual period of time that we go out in the field. Every one of those 5 teams is going to get the record. One of those 5 teams is going to get the actual new record because they'll be out for the longest, and it'll be somewhere, it'll be 7 weeks, 8 weeks, maybe even 9 weeks, who knows.
Yeah.
So this is all, it's like everybody else in production, we're facing lots of new challenges with regard to COVID and dealing with the protocols for that. And then we're dealing with the new challenge of catching up with the media pipeline and which will involve, we're all going to be busy at work, and we are busy at work, and hopefully everybody's busy at work soon, and we can get back to giving people content.
Perfect. I know everyone's always excited for the new season of it. And because you were mentioning, that you have 5 different teams out there, and before we jumped into this conversation, I know, Dwayne, you were mentioning sometimes you have kind of a handoff between the 2 of you where someone goes out and takes over after someone else has been there for that period of 2 or 3 weeks. So what does that really look like, and how does that work in terms of, as the cinematography team, capturing all the footage and making sure that there's a seamless transition when a new team is coming out to kind of like pick up on a story that's already in progress, to make sure that everybody on the post-production side and on the producer side is getting what they need from you guys in terms of content and thinking about those narrative arcs that each of the episodes so beautifully capture?
Sure. Well, that was a situation that happened, but that isn't actually normal. Generally speaking, our teams, we're really tight teams, without getting too much in the detail of it. It's basically 4 people on our camera team. It's a director of photography. There's a producer who also handles camera work too. Then there is a camera assistant who does all the DIT work and manages and wrangles the cameras and batteries and makes sure that everything is ready to go on a daily basis. They also do camera work. And then we have a safety person who essentially runs our camp. Deals with camp logistics, everything from fuel to resupplies, all the things that we on the camera team on a daily basis are too busy doing camera work to deal with. They are also, fortunately for us, they're all really good cooks, and they handle true safety in a sense that they're the ones who carry a gun and make sure that bears aren't coming around the corner or we get into any trouble with wildlife or anything like that. As well as they essentially are the last check off on any plans that we have for the day. And if they think we're doing something unsafe, then they can they can basically say, no, we got to rethink this and do this in a safer way. And so we all work as a team to do that, but it's a small team, and we're usually all there together for the entire duration of the shoot, which, like I said, usually lasts about 3 weeks, but sometimes drags on because what we're filming might take longer to film, or there might be weather challenges that hold us up, or other logistical challenges with resupplies, and sometimes stories go really quickly, especially hunts and things like that can go, all of a sudden we can, instead of taking 4 or 5 days to get an episode worth of content for that location, we might have a full episode worth of content in 1 day or 2 days. And so generally speaking, we're all there at the same time. On occasion, someone has to shuffle in or out because, like I said, legs might go longer, and someone might have a wedding to go to, or an important other event, family event, or something to deal with. And so then we all know one another, and we've worked with one another enough, sort of mixed and matching these teams over the course of time. Like I personally have been on, I think this is my 31st trip up to Alaska. So I've worked with 31 different small teams. And so I've worked with everybody. And so we all know one another. And if someone has to come in and fill in, or we want to switch out for whatever reason, it's a pretty seamless thing, and we can do it. And we've all been through the drill enough times that we can fit in with one another, and certainly with the sort of the formula of the show to say,
yeah,
that's a good description.
Yeah, I agree.
So Dwayne,
it's a pretty rare occasion that we have to switch out, but I did sort of tag in for Ben at one time when he left for medical reason, and I ended up working with a producer who I'd worked with before, a cast member who I'd worked with before, and then 2 new people who I'd never worked with before. But because there's a set format to the show, there's sort of parameters that we work in, and we're all have been through it before. It was a pretty seamless transition to sort of pick up and carry on from there.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm genuinely so fascinated about in terms of your work specifically on the show is that, you know, camera work in of itself is already a really physically demanding job with very unique challenges to it. And then taking that one step further with a show like this, where you're traveling and you're setting up camps and you're literally packing up, you know, all of this equipment, having to physically carry a lot of things, you're working under such extreme conditions. Is there anything that you do before you know that you're going back to work on the show in terms of physical preparation that you wouldn't necessarily be doing if you were, you know, shooting a narrative feature in Chicago, for example?
I know personally for myself, in my time in between legs when I'm back home in LA or traveling, I just try to stay healthy. Mostly try to keep fit and stay healthy, because when you're out there in the field, you don't want to get hurt, and I think having a good sort of baseline physical fitness is a big part of that.
How about for you, Ben?
I would totally agree. I feel in a way it's funny, going to work for me feels like an extended workout in many senses. We're loading. And people in production know this. There's a lot of loading of gear in and out various places. For people who aren't in production, it might be astounding to truly understand how much gear we're loading on a daily basis. And for us out here, we're moving it from place to place constantly, and throwing on a backpack that maybe has, 30 pounds worth of gear, and maybe 40, maybe 50. With cases, and just moving them over to the other side of the yard, or to this or to that on a momentary basis, and then throwing it all in a vehicle or in a snowmobile, strapping it down, and then getting on that machine and going. And so it ends up being quite exhausting by the end of the day. And during the off times when I'm not working, one of my favorite things to do is to stay active and go outside. I live in Tahoe, and I ski and snowboard, and I like to rock climb and all these things. And it's nice that stuff is actually work related. It keeps me in shape to be able to carry around all this stuff on a daily basis. But it certainly is a concern. Like, if and I'm sure Dwayne will say the same thing. If if our body isn't feeling right at the beginning of a leg, it's a source of anxiety, because we know that there will be so many physical challenges on each one of these legs. Every time we go out, I generally don't feel apprehension or upcoming anxiety about work in general with regard to the actual camera work aspect of it. The thing that I always that keeps me up a little bit at night just before legs, thinking about what the challenges are, the physical challenges and the logistical challenges on a daily basis of having everything change on a moment's notice, and you have to pick everything up, and or the whole what you think might happen during the day gets completely changed, and everything, we're following what is happening, and those are the things you can't control. And so, of course, those are things you try not to worry about at all, but those are the actual things that in a way, that are the most challenging.
Yeah, and in addition, we're wearing, boots and gloves, and we're, it's not just a studio shoot where, you can kind of come in comfortable clothing. That just adds another sort of layer of difficulty to all the camera work itself and the logistics of moving around and being out there.
Yeah, and anytime that, either yourselves or anyone else working on the show in the crew talks about it, obviously one of the biggest things that comes up is the logistical challenges with a lot of the camera equipment, because cameras weren't built to be shooting in sub 50-degree temperatures. And there are times where equipment can just lock up and stop working, and you have to kind of pick up a different type of camera or figure out how to shoot something differently on the fly. And so for both of you, I was really interested in how working on this show has given you a completely different relationship and understanding of cameras and the equipment that you're working with, and the way that it's forced you to think differently and problem solve on the spot, and have to really understand not just how you're holding a camera and following a story, but literally the granular mechanics of it inside as well at a different scope.
I would say one of the biggest concerns is batteries. When it gets cold, batteries do not last as long, and we don't always have a place to recharge. Sometimes we're only recharging all of our batteries at the end of the day when we get back to camp and have generator power. So there's always a running count in my mind of how long has this camera been on, how many fresh batteries have I gone through, how many do I have left? Because if you're getting down towards the end of the day and you don't have much juice left, but the story's still happening, you have to have power to capture it. So that's something that's always on my mind.
And in terms of lighting as well, you're constantly playing with available light because you're filming outside, and there's times of year where that light is beautiful, and I imagine there's some amazing shots that you really manage to capture that you wouldn't otherwise. But then you're also filming at times of year where there's very little usable light within a day. And so how do you have to completely reimagine the process at those points to still be able to maximize and get the footage and get the story that you're ultimately going for?
Yes, fortunately, Alaska the light is always changing in Alaska. We get essentially an hour more or an hour less of sunlight every week for every week of the year. It's going from zero light to a lot of light. So it's always a challenge. The beauty of it is there's often a twilight happening. And even if there's very little time available to film, the light is quite beautiful. And so in a weird way, it works really well. And sometimes when the light goes down and it's really dim, if we just do something simple like put a headlamp on our subject and make sure that the headlamp is sort of tilted in the right direction, so it's showing a little bit of their face, but then illuminating a little bit around them, and especially in the cold, because this would be at a period of night and even a colder portion of the day, their breath comes out, and it just ends up looking great. And so there are tricks to it, but we've all learned how to utilize them, and it ends up really highlighting and showing. That's when the TV screen actually looks and really feels like the way we're feeling it out in the field and filming it. It's dark and it's cold, and it looks dark and it looks cold, but it also looks really beautiful. And so I feel lucky, despite the challenges of having to film in that kind of environment and that kind of cold, with gloves on, you can't even hit the buttons on the camera, and you're fumbling around, and like Dwayne said, the batteries are dying. But sometimes I'll just look around while I'm filming, and I'm like, I know that it looks really, really, really amazing, and it's going to play really well on television, and it's a thrill. So of course it's challenging, but it's also a thrill. That's part of the beauty of our particular job.
Yeah, and one of the great things in terms of the subjects and the characters in the show that you're getting to follow is obviously their connection to wildlife, to nature, to the way that they're living off the land in such unique ways. And, you know, for you, Dwayne, when you were mentioning going back to Los Angeles at the end of shooting in Alaska, which is a wildly different space, does it change the way that you kind of think about things in the day-to-day and your own connectivity to the spaces around you when you return to Los Angeles after working on the show for a chunk of time?
Yeah, absolutely, it does. I can say I'm much sort of more aware of the environment and my impact on it, which I think you can lose track of living in a city day to day. But when you're out in Alaska and we're in remote locations, we really practice leave no trace. So any bit of waste that we create, we take back out with us, and you get to see just your impact on the environment, whereas everything just sort of disappears when you're in the city. So I really sort of try to bring that back with me when I'm home, try to be a little more eco-conscious, and because I really appreciate being able to get up to Alaska and get out there and, you know, film and work in those sort of conditions.
Yeah, and then kind of trailing off what you were just saying about working with the light, Ben, in terms of the weather as well, because, you know, it is also a space where the weather can turn on a dime, and we see it on the show so often, and you capture it so amazingly. Have you kind of learned to read weather and the environment differently from working on the show and having to respond to things like that so quickly?
Yeah, in a sense, it's always a challenge. My background, I came from a sports action background, shooting, skiing, and snowboarding. That's how I originally started. So I've been kind of in tune with that from the beginning. But truthfully, it's not a matter of being able to predict what the weather will do, because no one's really very good at that. It's mostly being prepared for when the weather does change. You just make the assumption at the beginning of the day that the weather will change. So you come with the things that you need to deal with it. So we've always, no matter what, we've always got plastic bags in in various parts of our kits, even the little run kits. If we like go run up a hill to follow something that's going on, we have a backpack or some small kit that has bags. We can cover the cameras if it all of a sudden starts to downpour rain. And it does. It happens all the time. And that includes gear for us, for our, you know, our personal comfort, and keeping things safe from the elements. Sometimes in the deep winter cases that will somehow keep batteries a little warmer than they normally would be if we didn't do anything. We'll put them in insulated cases with some heat, you know, like the hand warmers and things like that, to make sure they don't just lock up and we're just left with no batteries that work, because that happens. If you leave a battery out for more than a few seconds, sometimes it just doesn't work very well anymore, or the LCD screens on the camera just stop working. So all of a sudden we're flying blind, and we're still trying to film, but we have to use our instincts and our experience with knowing our equipment to sometimes film without even knowing exactly what we're filming. We're looking at what our focal length is on our camera, and we're reading the focus ring to make sure that we're focusing at least close to what we want to. And it's not uncommon that our main cameras will go down, and we'll be only left with our, you know, because we have the main Canon cameras that we use that capture audio and all that, and we use for scene work. And then we've got a bunch of GoPros. We've got a slow motion camera. We've got drones. And when the conditions get super severe, they'll start falling off, and all of a sudden we don't have use to this camera and this camera and this camera. And then at what point do we decide that we can't film this anymore, or at what point do we just keep going with what we have available? And so that's a constant challenge, especially in the deep winter when it's super cold. And that's just a matter of, we like to stay with it. And if things are looking good, we just like to keep filming. And then we see what we get in the end.
Yeah.
But that's not normal. That's not a normal studio shoot to have that kind of thing happen. I mean, there are plenty of challenges in studio shoots. Don't get me wrong. These are just a little more extreme in that sense.
Yeah.
But it's fun. It's fun. And if the cameras go down, what can we do? We just keep going until we can't shoot it anymore.
I also wanted to ask you both about your evolution in terms of your relationship and the dynamic of these incredible participants and characters in the show, you know, and how that's kind of evolved over time, because you're in such a unique position where you're in this really intimate environment where you need to have a relationship of trust with them, but then you're also creating that balance of impartiality and really just following what's happening. But as you've gotten to kind of follow individuals for the show and know them a little bit better, do you find yourself better able to like anticipate potentially where the story's going to go, and even just down to like physically where you think they're going to go, and you're going to have to follow them within a space as you're capturing something?
Yeah, I think definitely being able to work with the same cast members over a course of, you know, months or years, you know, off and on, you definitely get a rapport with them over a while. And I think there is a bit of, you know, sort of that ability to anticipate sort of where they're going to go at certain times. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but yeah, you do sort of get a sort of sync with them because you're, you know, spending all day with them for a couple weeks at a time.
And this is kind of a granular question that I was curious about, is in terms of a lot of the B-roll footage that you're shooting, because you are going back to a lot of the same spaces when you're filming at times now. So obviously you've already kind of captured that landscape that really kind of draws the audience in at the beginning. So how do you set about finding what's going to be like a really great new angle for that B-roll footage that's really going to emphasize and kind of just make a great story and really heighten it?
Well, we always just try to look at it with a fresh set of eyes. And, you know, I'll admit here to the viewers at home, something they probably would imagine is the truth. There's not always something happening at our locations. You know, we're not always filming our subjects all the time. You know, sometimes they're having breakfast or, you know, whatever. So we always try and spend our extra time getting B-roll. And the beauty is that, like I said before, the light is always changing. We're getting an hour more or less of light every week, no matter what time of year you're in. And the seasons change really quickly. And so it's not hard to look at it with a fresh set of eyes, because it actually always is looking somewhat different. And when the weather changes and when the clouds change, if the rain comes in, we can film all the same things and get B-roll of all the same little things that we got a few days before, but maybe now there's water dripping off of it because it's raining and it looks different. Or I'm in a location right now where at Jesse's place, he's got a lot of dogs, and the dogs are always in, you know, they go through various moods. So I can always get some more B-roll of dogs. Like, it never gets boring. And I find it really, I enjoy it. I enjoy the moments where I know that nothing's happening scene-wise or narrative-wise to film, and I know I have another hour or two before something might happen, and I get to go just look around for like a flower or a bug, or shoot some slow-mo of flies collecting on like a dead fish. And we, on Life Below Zero, I feel very fortunate. I know that the rest of the crew does too. We get to film a lot of things that aren't normally considered suitable even or reasonable for television. Because why else would you film, for instance, flies buzzing around the carcass of a dead fish? It seems like an absurd thing to film in a sense. But because it's totally relevant to, it can be totally relevant to a story where someone's fishing and pulling in a net full of a huge number of fish for their food, maybe for their dogs or for themselves. that all of these things become, even morbid and bizarre things become actually very relevant. And we get to go stick a camera on it. Whereas it's just funny to me to think that in any other context, it would almost be weird to film those kinds of things. But for our show, it makes the weird and absurd relevant and normal, because it turns out in life the weird and absurd actually is normal and relevant. Because of our show, we get to show it. Yeah. And that's fun. So there's always something to film.
Yeah, we get to go to some amazing places that are just constantly inspiring. So it's easy to find new ways to sort of film things, especially as Ben was saying, the weather changes, the season changes, and those changes are so extreme, they might change the location from year to year. If you haven't been to one of these spots since the previous winter, trees could have blown down, the river could have shifted. So the landscape is so rugged and extreme that it's constantly changing as well. And we have so much creative freedom on the show to really try to push the boundaries and get shots that wouldn't work on other shows, as Ben was saying. So yeah, it's a constantly inspiring project to work on.
Yeah, and in terms of kind of what you were just mentioning about, you're really showing the space, you're also doing that with the subjects of the show, and really the show allows them to be their own narrative voice. They're the ones telling us, we don't have someone else's voiceover narration coming in and saying, this person's living here, this is who they are. They're the ones telling us. And is there kind of a dynamic and a preparation that goes into that? Not necessarily directing what they're going to do in their day, but working with them, and especially in the earlier stages of the show, to build that rapport so that they feel comfortable, not just chopping up logs, but telling the camera what they're doing, why they're doing it, how things are impacting their day in different ways, and really giving that voice to the show.
I'd say certainly. Cameras affect any environment. That's sort of just a simple adage. And so anybody who hasn't been filmed, it feels awkward at the beginning. And so we do our best to let them know how we're going to do it. Certain things about how they might be moving relative to the camera that make it easier for us to continue to get shots, as opposed to it making it more difficult. And they trust us. We do our best to earn their trust, so that they basically say yes if we have a request. One of the things that we do that's common is we might get them to repeat something that they just did. Like if I see a movement of something that looks really cool, but the camera wasn't exactly on it, then I might say, move in that way. Can you walk through that thing again because the sun was really cool, and do that again? And they'll be like, yeah, absolutely. And it's very common for us to ask them to repeat themselves. And this is not a normal thing. If they were living their normal lives, they would be going about their business and they wouldn't be explaining it to the viewer through the TV screen. And so we have to help them to be able to explain it effectively to those who are watching. And so that's what in the sense, if we're directing them in any way, it's to get them to further explain what they're doing so that everybody understands and no one's left guessing who's watching on television, because we don't want people to guess on television. We want them to enjoy and see everything that's going on. And so that's a bit of training, in a sense, that we sometimes have to do with them or remind them of, that's important for us to be able to get the filming done in the best possible way, to give the editors the best possible chance of making a story that makes sense. Because just because a story makes sense or something's happening and it makes sense out in the real world, doesn't mean that it's easy to capture on film. And so we have to do little things like that, reminding them, what are you doing? Can you explain that again? can you turn that wrench one more time so I can get the good shot of that particular little moment, and then we'll move on. So we in a general sense, they have to be very patient with us, because as camera people, we want to get really good shots. And so if anything, we're slowing them down a bit, because we have to move and we have to do this and make sure that we're in a reasonable position to capture everything that we want to capture. And so those are things that we have to do, and we have to ask them to be patient with us, and we have to be patient with them if they're not understanding what exactly we want. We just have to explain it and then move on and let them continue to do what they're doing, which is what we're capturing, is basically what they're doing, and we're following them around.
Yeah. And in terms of kind of looking at the incredible work that you've done on the show up until this point, is there a particular moment for each of you that really stands out that you still kind of sit with and think about, either in terms of just what you had the opportunity to witness, or kind of what actually went into you capturing something and the way that you managed to achieve something on the show?
On a daily basis, I'm constantly pinching myself at how lucky I am, despite the hardships. You know, it's not easy, but there's nothing I'd rather be doing. And every day there's something amazing that happens. I have a long list of memorable moments. It could be just a day where the weather was so beautiful. I just was filming and I couldn't believe how just comfortable and awesome everything was. On the other end of the spectrum, there are times where it was so hard I couldn't believe that any of us in the crew were still standing, but yet we were still filming and we were still getting really cool stuff. And you know, Northern Lights are always amazing, and it seems again, I'll keep saying, I pinch myself when I'm watching the Northern Lights and working and getting paid, and you know, it seems incredible. And just the amazing landscapes that we get to see on a regular basis. I mean, we fly with all of our gear, oftentimes out in the middle of nowhere in a really small charter plane that's just stuffed with thousands and thousands of pounds of gear and our whole crew. And we're going somewhere where very few people go. You look around and you see nobody. And so there aren't many, I mean, there are wild places left on Earth, but they're getting fewer and fewer every year, and there aren't that many of them. And we just feel really fortunate to be able to go into the middle of nowhere to film people who deal with living in the middle of nowhere. It's a pretty amazing thing.
It is. How about for you, Dwayne?
Yeah, it's hard to think of just one, because there's so many amazing opportunities I've had on the show. I would agree with Ben. Seeing the Northern Lights is always incredible. And I just remember the first leg I ever did on LBZ. One day we're filming snow machining down the Yukon River in a whiteout squall, and it was harrowing and also beautiful and amazing. And then the next day I got to sit in like the sled of a dog sled run and film like the dogs from behind. And I'd never been anywhere near like a dog sled before. It was just an incredible adventure, and to just be able to work on a really quality program and to have all these opportunities to witness and sort of illustrate the beauty of Alaska and sort of bring that into the show is always amazing.
Yeah, it's so remarkable what you managed to capture on the show and the way that you make it look so easy. But obviously we know that there's huge challenges every single day in making this. So, you've both done such a fantastic job on the show, and all the accolades for it are so well deserved. And thank you so much for talking to us today about all of this.
Well, thank you.
Thank you very much for having us. We appreciate it. It's been a thrill.